Hello and welcome to the channel. Zach D Productions here, and I'm here for a discussion video for you guys. It's actually been a little while since my last discussion video, to be honest with you guys, but that's because I've been running out of topics to talk about. But this is a different kind of discussion video. This is more of a relatable one for me. Now, if you guys don't know, but I usually do try to get into a new band every year, usually a few bands at least, because I usually like to challenge myself and explore new music, of course, because I personally could not stand listening to the same bands for years on end, which surprisingly, I do know that there's many people out there that it's been a while for them since they've gotten into a new band. And you know, it's sad because these are people that are musicians. Like, these are people that should be music fans, but it's like someone like me who's not a musician has more of a musical exploration than they do. And it's kind of absurd to me. So I definitely do think that people like that, they should explore more musically, because you don't know what you're missing out on. Because the thing is, man, there is so much great music out there. There's a lot to listen to. There really is. And even if it is something that, you know, doesn't sound like what you already listen to, so what? Give it a chance. You know? That's really all you can do, right? And this is something that I do try to do every year. Usually I get into a few bands every year, a few new bands. Now, when I say new bands, I don't mean literally new bands, like the band just now formed and they only have like one album or a few EPs or whatever. No, I don't mean literally new. I mean new to me, basically. Bands that I never really took the time to listen to until recently, basically. So I'm going to tell you guys how I personally get into new bands every year, because I know that there's some people out there that also don't even know how I'm into a lot of bands. Like, how do you keep track of all these bands? And of course, these are, I guess, people that only listen to a few bands. I guess they don't understand the concept of someone being into many bands. But, you know, I kind of see this as a plus because, again, it's a lot to listen to, and, you know, there's even people out there that are into way more bands than I am, believe it or not. Sure, I do like a lot of bands, but believe it or not, there's people out there that listen to way more bands than I do. And yeah, everything that I do check out usually is within the rock and metal spectrum. And, you know, the thing is I usually try to diversify my taste when it comes to rock and metal. Not that I think that other genres of music are bad or anything, but you guys know that rock and metal are my main go-to genres. And, you know, I do listen to a variety of rock and metal. I, of course, like thrash metal, progressive metal, some death metal, some new metal, progressive rock, classic rock, you name it. Like many styles of rock and metal. To be honest, there's not really much that I don't like, if I'm being honest. Now, of course, you know, there's a few subgenres that I'm not that crazy about, of course, which you guys already know if you know me well enough. So in this video, I just want to briefly discuss how I get into bands, what the process is for me, basically, and how exactly I do so. Typically, what I do whenever I'm interested in a band, well, obviously, that's basically where it starts. You got to have an interest in a certain band, and, you know, a band's got to pique your interest one way or another, whether you've heard good things about that band, whether you've heard maybe a few snippets of that band's music and you've just liked what you've heard and you have intention on checking out their music later down the line, of course. That's typically where it starts, is you gotta have an interest in that band to begin with. Or maybe it's due to a reviewer like me on YouTube that has said nothing but good things about a band. Maybe you follow a music reviewer, and maybe a few music reviewers who are really giving a lot of hype to a specific album or a band, and because of that, maybe that's something that does spark your interest a little bit, and checking out that particular album or that band. That it could really start there as well, and you can see what all the hype is about once you check out that particular band. Now, whenever I check out a band, or whenever I guess, get interested in checking out a band, usually it could be either due to one of those reasons. Maybe a band that's maybe one of my fellow acquaintances or one of my friends on YouTube, also in the reviewing community, have talked about. You know, and that's a good thing about us. You know, people like us, we not only get into our viewers into different bands, but we get each other into different bands as well. And that's something that definitely plays a factor. So that's something that does work for me as well. Obviously, maybe hearing a few snippets, hearing a few seconds of a band song on something, and you have a little bit of interest there in checking out their music later on. Now, for me, whenever I do actually go and check out a band, usually I'm going to start off with that band's highly regarded best album. Like if I see that, this particular album is, on the top of a lot of people's rankings, and, it's just highly regarded as one of their best. Typically, I'm going to start off with that album. And that's typically how I do things when I check out a band for the first time. I usually like to start off with their best album. Like, for example, when I first got into Rush, I started off with Moving Pictures as my first Rush album. And I think that would be a great first Rush album for many people. And if I were to introduce someone to the band Rush, I would say, hey, check out Moving Pictures, and just go from there. That's basically how it would go. And that's basically what I did. I started off with Moving Pictures, and it went off from there, I guess. Now, I do know that there's some people, once again, that's, I guess, are kind of out of the loop, I guess. They're not really aware of the consensus of opinions when it comes to certain bands. So maybe they'll start off with an album that's not one of the band's best, and maybe they'll have an opinion based on that alone, maybe because they started off with that band's worst album. For example, maybe like someone started off with Saint Anger as their first Metallica album. Like, obviously that's not a good start. Obviously, you're going to want to start off with something like Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets. I mean, one of those albums would be a more suitable start to the band, introduction to the band. So there is that. So it's definitely important to, I guess, be aware, like what people are saying. Now, of course, music is subjective. Not everyone is going to feel the same way about the same particular album or whatever. Not everyone's going to have the same favorite album. But typically when it comes to most bands, there's going to be usually like that 3 to 4 album cycle or whatever, where one of those albums are often considered some of the band's best work, and it usually is suitable to start off with one of those albums. Again, going back to Metallica, you're going to want to start off with one of their 80s albums, or maybe even the Black Album when you get into Metallica for the first time. And usually when it comes to the Metallica fan base, very rarely is it that someone's favorite Metallica album is outside of the first 5 albums. That's just not something that typically happens. It happens, but it's not something that you see every day. And that can really happen with many bands. So, yeah, typically I do like to start off with the band's best album, or at least it's highly regarded as their best. And I know another way of doing things. This is something that I know some people do. They usually like to start from the very first album to the last album. Basically, listen to the entire discography, and that's a good way of doing it as well. Now, typically, whenever I do get into a new band, I usually do try to get that band's music on CD. I usually do try to get CDs of every band that I do like. Sure, it may not be everything. I don't really obligate myself to collect everything. Most of their albums, sure. I mean, I would like to collect everything from every band that I like, but, that's not always going to happen, of course. So, most of them, yeah, maybe. Or at least some of them, for that matter. And it just kind of goes from there, and you would be opening up your mind to other genres, other subgenres of music and such. So that is typically how I get into different bands. I usually like to pay attention to what other people are saying, and if I have any interest, I'll check out the band, and I'll just go from there, and sometimes I'll even check out certain bands in a certain subgenre that pique my interest. So that's a way of doing it. So that's my video, guys. That's how I get into bands for the most part. I just wanted to briefly talk about this. So let me know what you guys think. How do you guys get into different bands? Feel free to let me know.